All right, it looks like we are live. Hello and welcome everyone to another Chat and Learn here with Power to Fly. My name is Mariella Marie, and as always, super excited to roll into this next hour with you all. I have had the pleasure, the honor of speaking with these fabulous women who are here to drop so much knowledge here in the next hour. And I know that everyone, is really with their pens and pads ready to take notes and all of that. But before we get started, I just want to cover some quick housekeeping rules so that we can all feel comfortable and confident in this next hour. Goes without saying, I love to start these sessions off by reminding us, even though we don't need reminders, lots of crazy things going on in the world. Seems like everything's topsy-turvy. You could be doing anything else with your time, but you're deciding to be present with us here for the next hour, whether you're here live with us or whether you're rewatching this video. We see you, we appreciate you. We know that you are here to participate. So if you're here live, you can participate in a number of ways. You can turn your cameras on if you feel called to do so. I was just speaking behind the scenes before we went live here that I know that video fatigue and camera fatigue and digital fatigue is, super real. So there is no pressure there, but we believe in visibility here. And I just wanted to extend that invitation. So turn your cameras on whenever you feel called to do so. Otherwise, you can hop off mute if you have something you'd like to share. Let's please be respectful of everyone though, and have one person off of mute at a time. If you're on the fence about hopping off of mute, you can write to me privately, or you can write in the public chat box and I would just add you to the queue. If you do hop off mute, you will be featured in our live recording as this is being recorded. And with that said, I know we live in a world where everyone, we are multitasking kings and queens these days. So let's try to not multitask. Let's try to be present in this next hour, close all those tabs out, ask your dog to, go and take a nap in the corner so that you could be present. I like when cats make cameos over the camera though, so invite your cats to join the conversation as well. If anyone has any private information, any sensitive information, and you prefer to be kept anonymous, you can find me in the chat box under Mariella Marie. You can write to me privately and I will flag your question or your reflection to our guest speakers. I'm going to sound like a broken record throughout this conversation because I want you all to participate, really maximize this time here. So again, turn your cameras on if you feel called to do so, write in the chat box, write to me privately if you don't want to be putting things publicly in the chat box. And the last thing that I'll say is you will get a rewatch email with the link to watch this video later or share with your friends in your community. So keep that in mind. You'll also get links to resources and beautiful things that our guest speakers are mentioning throughout the conversation. So be looking out for that rewatch email. And if this is the first time you're joining a chat where I have moderated, I'll just take a couple seconds to introduce myself. So again, I'm Mariella Marie, originally from Los Angeles. I currently live in Patagonia, and I love speaking about the importance of developing our emotional intelligence at home and in the workplace. So I might bring some of my reflections to that point. Feel free to philosophize with me if you're interested. And I would love to invite you all to support the project that I'm working on that is called the Positive Force Team. You can go to thepositiveforceteam.org, sign up for our newsletter, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect there. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to our guest speakers. Raw Goddess, let's start with you. I would love for you to introduce yourself. For those who weren't able to join a chat where you were, I think it was last year. It seems like it was yesterday, but last year we had you both on. Let us know a little bit about yourself, how you came to learn about Power to Fly, and what you're excited to share with us today, Raw.
Awesome. So welcome, everyone. And it's my joy and my privilege to be here. Thank you, Mariella, as always, for the masterful facilitation and guidance. We are in such incredible hands. That's just the truth. So I am what is known as an entrepreneurial soul coach and the co-CEO and co-founder of NFormation. We are a vetted member platform for women of color, by women of color. And Deepa, I'm sure, will share a little bit more of the history of this, but we come to the work of NFormation through having listened to literally hundreds and hundreds, and at this point, probably well over 1,000 women, in terms of understanding and recognizing the unique experiences that they have as being first and fews and onlys in their industries, in their particular corporations or divisions, or first in the C-suite. And there is a unique experience and a unique perspective that they carry, and we provide safe, brave, and new space for those women to be able to gather, to be able to grow their leadership, and to be able to reimagine the way that we think about power and success and the way that we structure power and success. And so I'm so thrilled to be here in terms of my history, a long time working with leaders and developing curriculums and experiences that are all about aligning them with purpose and calling and creating culture, thriving cultures and communities. And it's my joy and my privilege to be here. And I'll turn it to my partner, Ms. Deepa.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, Deepa, let us know a little bit about yourself as well. Also, let us know how you came to learn about Power to Fly and what you're excited to share with us today.
Well, thank you. First of all, as Ross said, we have worked with you before, you've facilitated our sessions before, and it's so easy and seamless. So I'm excited to be here with you. Ra was my executive coach. We met 6 years ago. I was a partner at Deloitte, knee deep in asking questions around, belonging, purpose, what else did I want to do with my life? I had an amazing career, but we're just asking different questions because I still had runway and didn't go to business school. I was a policy person. And so really wondering, was it a time to go back to politics or do something else? As I started working with Ra, she started to help me ask bigger questions around purpose and calling. I found myself also asking new questions about being a woman of color in the workplace. And so very long story short, I left a 21-year corporate career last year and am writing a book that comes out in March, I should say, called The First, the Few, the Only, How Women of Color Redefine Power in Corporate America. And Ra and I started NFormation. So NFormation is a company that really focuses on bringing together professional women of color. Most of what we're going to be talking about is a combination of the research from the book, but also from the discussions that Ra and I have had. We've convened women of color across the country in person prior to COVID, and then obviously virtually now. And we're having real discussions about what it means to advance, what it means to show up differently, how we get recruited, what women of color need to thrive. And so it's been a really amazing journey. We are 6 months up and running program-wise. And the feedback has been really powerful. And so we're excited to share some of that with you. And we're also right now starting to work with companies around recruitment and retainment activities as well. So that's kind of the next piece of what we're doing. Also launching some coaching services for women of color, and even looking at when we can all get back together. How do we bring women of color together to really be in our power in community live and talk about what we want to do next?
Beautiful. So I can attest to the beautiful work that these women are doing. I am a part of the NFormation community, and I mean, it's such an honor to share the way that you have set up the space, virtual space now, and hopefully soon in a physical space, but to just be authentic and to share stories and to listen, practice active listening. And it's so inspiring. I've never been a part of a community like what you all are building at NFormation. So I just want to say thank you. And again, we're going to be dropping links so folks can learn more. And don't worry, they're going to probably sprinkle some of their responses with, some of their experiences and some things that they want to share. So without further ado, we're going to roll into these awesome questions that you all have submitted previous to the chat. But I do want to shout out where folks are calling from. So our guest speakers are calling from Los Angeles. I'm calling from Patagonia in Argentina. We've got Virginia on the line. We've got Rochester, New York representing, Spain on the line, Chicago, Buenos Aires, Argentina, San Francisco, Virginia, California, Huntington Beach, California, Chicago, Illinois. Great. So if you're just joining us, go ahead and let us know where you're calling from. Just drop that in the chat box. We would love to know where you are in the world and just to see the power of digital community and just, respect that. I love that everyone is here participating. Thank you so much. So we're going to dive into these questions. If you hear your question come up and you're here live with us, let us know that you're here. If you don't hear your question come up and something comes to mind, maybe a dream that you had last night, maybe reflection that you just want to, continue to dive in deep there, we want to hear from you. I'm going to sound like a broken record because we want to hear from you. So drop those in the chat box or feel free to hop off mute. Let's start with this first question here. How do you define power? Is there a universal element, or is this very specific to each person or setting?
Rod, do you want to go first?
I was going to say, Deepa, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we're going to get slightly different answers from each of us. I think part of what we believe is that power is really, I'll say what I believe. I think it's what Rob believes as well, but power is really unique to the individual. And it's something that we get to define for ourselves. I think there's very different definitions of power, and I've gotten to study them as I've written this book. And there's, there is positional power, there's relational power, there's structural power. But I think for women of color, especially in this moment that we're in, where a lot of us are stepping into bigger roles, a lot of us are being called to really use our voice in a very different way. It feels like in this moment, what we really focus on is personal power. There is a lot of personal power that we have. And I think sometimes we're not really taught to know that we have it. I'll speak for myself. I think as an Indian woman growing up in the United States, it's sometimes been hard to find my voice. And so a lot of what I believe is that we all have personal power, but we don't always see it in the same way. And we sometimes relate power to the outside images we see, and they don't necessarily always look like power that we have as women of color, and whether it's in workspaces or out in the world. And so part of our work is helping women realize that they have power, and you have power in almost every situation that you're in. And it's a little bit of really understanding what that power looks like and making choices from that point. I also will end with, I believe power is really about choice and liberation, and really understanding that in every situation, how you show up, how you answer a situation, the way in which you respond is also a form of power and individual power. And that's a lot of what we talk about.
Yeah. Amen. Ditto, ditto, ditto to everything that Deepa said. I do think it's personal. I do think it's personally defined. I would also say the power is your capacity to show up as your most authentic self and to make your highest contribution and to be unencumbered in your ability to be able to do that. And so when Deepa talks about personal power, for me, personal power must also lend itself and be leveraged into the world so that you can show up in a way that enables you to actualize your greatest self and your fullest potential. And there are lots of ways in which we, bring definitions to success that enable us to either feel like we have the freedom and the permission, quite frankly, to do that, or not. So be you, bring what you're here to bring.
Absolutely. And what a beautiful way to set the stage. So I appreciate this question that was submitted. And this is a great way to just set the stage. And now let's dive deeper. So let's move more into the workplace. This question kind of rings towards that form of power. Would you share the most shocking or view-altering realization you've had around power in the workplace? Raw Goddess, let's start with you since you ended that reflection.
Yeah, I think the fact that we are now at a place maybe where we're willing to have conversations that we couldn't have even a year and a half ago. And the fact that I think that so many of us want to have those conversations, but there's still so much trepidation and hesitancy about how to do that. And I think that the thing for me that I think continues to surprise me is where will and capacity have still not quite yet met in the middle, right? Where the aspiration and the desire and then the actual permission and capacity to be able to do that, I think is part of what I think I'm still kind of going, wow, okay, there's a tremendous opportunity here. But I think the other thing that I will say is that the courage that I see being shown every single day on the part of people who are passionate about wanting to create thriving cultures is something that is both awe-inspiring and very, very empowering.
Absolutely. Deepa, you want to chime in there? I love that you all are being so authentic with your responses, and not that I was expecting anything less, but I think that there's just a lot of lip service happening these days. So it's just so refreshing to hear, this is coming from the heart. So thank you, Raw Goddess. Deepa, can you share something that has been shocking or view altering around the power in the workplace?
Yeah, and I'm partly smiling because I feel like you're going to get this with Raw and I. Raw tends to be all inspirational and very positive, and I get a little bit more grounded in the practical and the pessimism. But I would say for me, the shocking things have been, number one, that a lot of the women of color we've met don't feel powerful. And that has been shocking. They don't feel in their power. They don't necessarily know how to use their voice in the workplace. They feel like they can't be their full selves. They don't even, in some cases, want to try. And when I'm talking about pretty senior women, we work with I would say mid-career plus, and lean even higher. I would say more VP in the corporate space, more director level in other spaces. And so that was really shocking. And I think my own research is really the part that has been most shocking is that more women of color feel less powerful the higher up they go. So I expected to find women in the C-suite. I expected to find, really senior women feeling more powerful, that as you got to the seat, as you got closer to the prize, as we call it, that they felt more powerful. It was actually the opposite, that there was more pressure to conform. There was more pressure to behave in a certain way, and a real tension between how women wanted to show up and what they thought they should do. And so that is shocking and disappointing. And part of what Ron and I are trying to do is to make sure that doesn't continue to happen. But in order for that not to happen, we have to have conversations like this, both with the women themselves, but also with all of you, about how do we make sure that cultures also recognize that women of color are not always feeling powerful. We need to recognize that. And I'm not saying help them, because I feel like a lot of that is on us to do for ourselves, but maybe get out of the way a little bit so we can show that power in more frequent ways.
Absolutely. And I'd love to just chime in here. I mean, we are at a crossroads, and the crossroads of, do we continue to have this colonized way of living, working, breathing, sharing, or do we try to decolonize the mind? And I think that putting women of color in a position where they are respected, heard, valued, and the integrity is there, that is a part of decolonizing our systems. And so that might seem like a very daunting word, but it's so necessary. And I think you all are doing great work to just help reshape that. So again, I thank you. I'm just going to be thanking you for this whole hour. With that said, let's move on to this next question here. Being a woman of color, what is the best advice you've received in your career? Deepa, can you pick this one up?
Yeah, I mean, mine's very specific because it's just the best career advice I've ever gotten. It was from my mentor, sponsor. He's a white male, was a white male partner. We still talk often, even though I've left. And his advice to me was never need a client more than you want a client. And, that context was client related. But, I joked with him at that time he gave me that advice. I was single and I was like, never need a man more than you want a man either. I think it applies to life, right? Like never get into a situation where you're beholden to the circumstances around you, right? And I think that's really the message. And I think when working with women of color, I mean, not everyone can leave the job that they're in if it's a toxic environment. Not everyone can, make choice right away to get out of a situation that doesn't work. But there are things you can do to start to move towards that. And so understanding that, I think, is a little bit about redefining power, but also recognizing that not all situations are great, right? Never needing a client more than you want a client. And so knowing how to evaluate situations for yourself and what cultures actually are friendly. Ron and I often talk about are friendly to women of color, and using that as part of your criteria. Again, that advice was very big advice, but I think it really applies to a lot of life, of never being in situations where you can't make different choices or you get into a hard situation and it's not right from the beginning, right? Follow your gut. I think that's really what that message is also really about.
Yeah, I want to build it's interesting because I feel like this response is going to be very kindred, which is that when you have values, you have choices. Mm-hmm. And to remember that, because I think that so many of us do feel like our back is against the wall. And we do feel like we don't have choices. It's interesting, when Deepa and I talk about the fact that women of color don't only feel empowered in the workspace, I'm going to say a lot of people don't feel empowered in the workspace, right? And I think that the opportunity of engaging and inviting women of color into a new suite of choices, right? A new realm where they can see that they have choice, invites the opportunity potentially for work cultures to get better for everybody. And I think that's really also part of what Deepa and I are touching in this call to working through women of color to help reimagine what work could look like at its best. But your values are your tuning fork. They are your compass, and they let you know what's on and what's off. And the more that you're able to listen to and honor your values, the more that you can recognize that you actually do have choices, even when it may appear that you don't.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much. I'm going to use this opportunity to hold for a light pause to see if someone wants to hop off of mute and chime in. So feel free to use this opportunity to hop off mute. I know that some folks need that space. If not, don't worry, I have more questions. Go for it. Yes.
Do you think that maybe people in those positions, like C-suite positions, women of color are more afraid to be their authentic self because they are afraid that any failures or things like goals they set or, new ambitions may be seen and kind of as, oh, well, you're not fit for the position. So the fear of failure for them is so much greater than being, a white counterpart who may be, seen as, well, they're ambitious and, we tried and, failures are great. We're going to learn from them. It's kind of seen in a different light.
I think it's a lot of things, to be honest with you. So yes, Hannah, I do think that's it. I think there's less room, candidly, for women of color to fail, of any, women, and I would say especially for Black women, right? I've had that conversation quite a bit personally. So I think that's part of it. I think, in the research for the book, what came up is women of color thought they would get to a certain role and then they would be themselves. So I'll conform, I'll behave a certain way, I'll adapt. And then when I get to the seat, I'll be different. And yet I think what I'm also saying is when you get to the seat, there's an expectation. And a lot of the women use the phrase toe the line, like I'm going to toe the line. And when they wanted to talk more about racial issues or push against something that didn't exactly feel right to them or express something, there was a little bit of a tension in, well, aren't you one of us? Or how do you express that? Or, oh, you have a different perspective. I think what I want to say is there's an opportunity for women of color to use that as a strength. So it's not all doom and gloom. So some of the women of color that have done this well and are super powerful in the C-suite have stepped into that. So they have, for example, taken on roles where there's one example I talk about, or I know Ron, I know her, she's in pharmaceuticals. And so she actually stepped into a role where she talked about medicine in underserved communities and really kind of made that her what she brings to the C-suite and what she brings to the table. So there's ways to bring it in that feels authentic and also feels authentic to the role. But I think it's a little bit of, there isn't always space for that. You do want to feel like you belong or that you're like everyone else. There's less room for failure. I also think it's just candidly hard if you're the only one. And sometimes, there's research on board data that says you need at least 2 or 3 people, 2 women, I think, to actually make change on a board, right? To have a different perspective. That's true for even on race and other things. Like, I think it's hard if you're the only one expressing something with a lived experience that isn't always shared. So I think there's a lot to that. That we have to unpack if we're really going to get under what is going to change things and what's going to make a difference. And I also think we're in a moment where there is more ability than ever before to do some of this as well, right? To kind of express what's different. So I also think we're in the moment, but we have to have we have to have gumption to step through it. And we also have to recognize within company cultures, like we are changing that dialogue and make space for that as well.
Yeah, I just want to underscore too that the pressure is real and that the pressure doesn't only come often from the culture and the pressure to conform, the higher you go, but the pressure comes from our families. The pressure comes from our culture. It comes from our communities, right? It comes from a lot of different places. And if women don't have room and space to talk about the pressure of those lived experiences and to talk about the multiple roles, because we're not only talking about women who are the first maybe to reach a particular level within the context of the C-suite or the board, but we're also talking about the women who are the first in their family to go to college. We're talking about women who are the first generation in this country. We're talking about, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of ways in which we are first and fews and onlys. And if we don't have the ability to bring our narrative into the center of our leadership, then there are lots of ways in which our contribution becomes encumbered and compromised. And we don't get to show up as our best. And then it becomes sometimes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Where we have the seat, but our arms are tied.
Thank you so much for hopping off mute, Hannah. And I really appreciate the question. I know that the fact that you are voicing this question means that it is happening in our collective sphere. And so I really appreciate you taking time to voice that. Ra and Deepa, thank you so much for sharing your reflection on that. Anyone else want to hop off of mute before we go to the next question? I love this. Anyone else want to hop off mute? I'm going to hold for a light pause here. All right. So actually, let's roll into this question that I think we can kind of piggyback on what Hannah brought up here. How can people claim their power when the power dynamic of the situation is not in their favor?
You want to take that one, Ron?
Sure. Absolutely. So I think the first thing that we all have the opportunity to look at is how we perceive power, because power is about perception, right? And I think when we come into organizations, there's often a way that we see ourselves in relationship to the way in which we see an organization defines power. And I think it would be an interesting exercise to ask yourself, well, how does my organization define power? What does my organization say about what power looks like, feels like, walks like, talks like, right? Smells like, right? And then where do I see myself in relationship to that? Do I see myself as a part of that? Do I see myself on the outside of that? Do I see myself striving to emulate that? So the first question is, we want to understand, where do we see, how do we think power is defined in our entities and organizations? And then where do we see ourselves in proximity to that power? And then we need to ask ourselves, based upon the way that that power is defined, is that the kind of power we want? And if it is, why? And if it's not, why not? Because to me, this is the conversation about alignment. So one of the first ways that we take our power back in any situation is, again, to recognize that we have values, we have beliefs, we have things that are really important to us. And that we get to decide and determine, are we in environments that we feel support, challenge, and invite us to grow inside of what we say is important? Are we in environments that stunt our growth, that challenge our sense of self, that challenge our perception of who we are in ways that do not empower us? And this is an important inquiry, because a lot of times we know when we get in jobs, we're so busy in the demands of the job, or we're so busy trying to navigate the politics of the environment, that it's hard to find that time and space to do that deeper questioning. And then for some of us, the truth is we don't necessarily like the answers. So we're like, maybe I'll just keep it moving. I'll tread water until I can figure it out. And I think the opportunity is, in terms of being able to take our power back, is to discern, one, if we feel like this is a place that we want to be, then what's the negotiation that begins to happen, where we can show up as more of ourselves and we can make more of what we believe is our highest contribution. And that really, the vehicle for that is our voice. So I want to sort of say that out loud, because a lot of what our women grapple with is being in full voice in the presence of perceived power. And so the opportunity is to start to really discern if it's a place we want to be. How do we start to take those courageous steps? How do we start to exercise those choices? How do we start to lean into those opportunities to be the contribution that we know that we can be in the environments that we're in? If we evaluate that the environment is not conducive to who we want to be and not conducive to the kind of power, then we start to look at what are the choices we may need to exercise. If we don't feel like there's room in the organization to make the contribution that helps shift the culture, then what are the choices that we want to and start to consider? And this is a courage conversation, but it's an important conversation.
I may share like a couple of different parts of this, and then we can put them all together. One is, Ron and I do this conversation often, and I'm surprised, although I shouldn't be anymore, when we ask women, like, what do you think power is? And, do you aspire to power? One, it's not a question we ask ourselves, like Ross said. So I also encourage you to ask for yourself, what is power? And literally start to write about it, because it'll be fascinating what you write for yourself. Secondly, most women, period, regardless of women of color, most women don't aspire to power, they say, because they see it as dirty or abusive, or just the term itself. And so I think it's part of this is like a shift in how we embrace some of the things we're talking about. And power doesn't necessarily, I think for a lot of women and women of color, this has come up as well, doesn't mean going up higher in an organization necessarily. Power is kind of very muddled in a lot of things, right? Access to resources and other things. So I think we have to, one, start to really redefine that, as Ross said. I think secondly, again, when we were about 3 months into existence, we actually polled our women, and almost 20% of our women, and again, really early on, said that they had either asked for bigger jobs, more money, or did something on the job just as a result of being on our community. And that was at that point, maybe 9 sessions, right? It wasn't like we had done, dozens and dozens and dozens of workshops. One, they had never had anyone say to them, you can ask for more, or give themselves permission to ask for more. And number two, once they saw that a lot of other women were struggling with the same thing, and again, pretty senior women were struggling with the same thing, they felt comfortable going back and asking or demanding or, requesting, whether that was in some cases just asking, and in other cases putting together a whole business case on why they deserve more money. We got to see a little bit of all of it. And so I think there's something to be said for permission around power and just asking, because we're not always taught to. And so that's the second part of it. I think the third part is that power looks different in different organizations. So it may not be a situation where you call out behavior. One of the things that I've talked to a few women about is when something egregious happens, like, is your HR department going to support you? Not all HR departments are the same, right? And I can imagine heads shaking, right? I mean, some are great and some unfortunately are not for reporting, racism or discrimination or other things. And so being really cognizant of your culture and what works well, who listens, how that works. Part of it is navigating systems. So I don't think you can speak up in the same way in every system, but I think there are ways to speak up within each system. And part of what our work is, and part of what we work with our women on, is understanding within your system, what is the right way. And maybe it's even collective. So, this is not a new example. We've heard this in the news and other places, but for example, women of color in some companies are coming together and sharing pay information, right? And that is a way to kind of show where there's inequity or push on things. And so some of it may not also be how you speak up on your own, but you speak up in groups or in a different sort of fashion. So happy to unpack any of that more. That's a lot of different answers, but I think there's different parts to this and there's different ways to do it. And it's not always about pushing on the system in the way that I think we think about it. There's other ways of doing it today.
So I love the responses from both of you. My question that I know maybe someone is tinkering with now that's listening, how do you find that courage to have these hard conversations with yourself first, and then to move that out into the environment that you want to, listen to you or to change? How do you have any recommendations on, doing some self-work to be able to find that courage?
Yes. I'll go first on this one around one, I think, for me, raw was invaluable. So getting an, executive coach or someone that you trust, someone that you can talk to, whether that's a friend or a family, a coach, someone within the company. I think you'd be surprised by how many women of color, the reason we've used the term, the first, the few, the only, is because a lot of them are alone in their organizations or in their departments or at their levels, right? So there is a real deep, that's the other thing that was surprising to us, the deep, deep sense of isolation. So a lot of women of color don't have people they can go to ask questions when something difficult happens or when they need to find their voice. And I think to activate your voice, you almost need that encouragement. So that's the second thing, is realizing that level of isolation is real and they don't have spaces. I think our own data and research and our own conversations would say just kind of the power of the community, right? A lot of what Ron and I talk about is the power of me and the power of we, right? There is power that you have as an individual, but once you recognize that some of the issues are structural, and by the way, that's not something I feel like we talked about until very recently. There is bias, there are structural issues, there is racism within business cultures, within business structures. That's true. I don't feel like I could have said that statement a year ago without a whole, bulleted list on why that's true. Maybe it shows up to different extents in different places, but it's there. I think that's a little bit more or a lot more accepted now. But I think understanding that, but still having places where you can have the conversation. I think it's partly why NFormation has been so powerful, to have spaces where you can have that discussion and really understand, yes, some of it is me, but some of it is also the structure and the people around me. And there's ways to get thoughts and almost practice. One of the things that Ron and I do with our women, she calls them love seats. I think in other places they're called hot seats, but women will bring a problem to the group and they'll get 70 plus, we usually get about 70 women on each one of our calls. They'll get 70 women to give them feedback on a problem or an issue that they're facing, and so I think that sort of setting doesn't happen all the time. So, and that's, again, a lot of different answers, but I think a lot of it's breaking through the isolation. That's how you start to do it, and just practice. It is a muscle that gets easier with time, and also gets easier when you have choices, that you are not beholden to the situation that you're in. So knowing your worth is also something that both Ron and I preach quite a bit, understanding that you can go other places.
I just would add, because I think that was a thorough answer, right? The thing that I would add is, one is that community is so important, because often when we talk with the women, it was personal. Mm-hmm. It was about them, that there was something wrong with them. And one of the biggest eureka was that, oh no, this is structural. There are actually patterns here. Deepa and I can track them over now, probably 1,000 conversations that we've had. We've actually been able to track 6 specific patterns and cycles of dynamics that are occurring. And I think to know that, if you're sitting there thinking it's you, it's not you. So that's the first breakthrough. And that's one of the things you find when you're in community. It's like, oh, wait, I really am not alone in this. There is a larger dynamic that's occurring. The second reason why being in community, and particularly our work in information, is important is because we also support women in getting the language. So one of the other aspects, we talk about using your voice, and I agree with Deepa, the voice isn't always about pushing against. The voice is also about asking. It's about navigating. It's about facilitating. It's about opening up. And often women needed the language to be able to go in and have the conversation. So how do I frame this? How do I speak to this? How do I talk about structural issues and challenges? Because it's not something necessarily that we've been taught how to do, right? And it's not something even that we've been aware of as operating. And so part of the work of community is to be able to have that strategic thought partnership, to be able to have those sounding boards, to be able to answer. And then the other thing I just want to underscore is the practice. Practice, practice, practice. Practice makes possible. The more that we practice raising our voice, the more that we practice raising our hand, the more that we practice speaking in alignment with our truth, the easier it does become. And to know that when we're raising our voices in ways that are courageous, it doesn't automatically make someone else the enemy. And I think that that's a big, large insight that we want to offer in the center of every conversation that we're having when it comes to organizational dynamics and when it comes to group politics, is that it all doesn't have to be about us and them. The more actually we are able to create space for a we conversation, the farther we can go, the more room there can be for more contributions, because everyone does get to benefit when we show courage. And that's something we haven't been taught. We've actually been taught the other way around. You show courage, you get your head chopped off. That's really what we've been taught. And so we want to invite us into a new definition and a new experience of what it means to be courageous.
Yes, I'm throwing digital confetti all around. I mean, it makes it less of a polarized conversation, which, again, in my opinion, in order to decolonize the mind and the way we work, we have to stop being so polarized. Yes, no, black, white, this or that, blah, blah. It's like, and not to, because I'm saying something that makes you the enemy. That's very polarized. Instead, let's make it more of a dynamic conversation. And automatically, even when you were saying that, Raj, it brought more space to just the awareness of that participation. So hopefully folks are really, downloading this as we're speaking of it now. And let's put this into practice now. Speaking of organizational dynamics here, I know that in the past, I don't know, I guess year, the diversity, equity, and inclusion realm has just catapulted, which is a beautiful thing, but there's a lot of mess that we need to clean up and make sure that we're doing it, in a very thoughtful and engaging way. So this question, I would just love to hear both of you reflect on this question here. I am the only person doing the work of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion at my company, and we are getting ready to develop a talent acquisition strategy. What are the top 3 most important things to consider as we investigate and build that plan with DEI as the primary objective?
I'm going to say Deepa, you go first. I know there's a lot we can say on this, but I'm going to go first.
One, I want to say the bigger issue is there was one person doing DEI, right? That forget about the question for a second. That's what the company should be focused on. I think that's part of the challenge, right? That is actually true probably in half the companies that I know I talk to. Ra, you talk to some even separately than I do, but that's a real issue, right? That some companies are early in their journey and the answer has been, let's put one person in place or 2 people in place and they'll take care of it. That sort of approach is not going to work. It has to be everyone's business. It has to be, executive level. It has to be at the manager level, because that's where people really feel the rub of the challenge of it, not when it doesn't work. So that's one part. I think, to answer the question though, even though I want to focus more on that, I think So two things. One is, we hear a lot, and we've heard in the news, there was a famous CEO who said, I can't find people, I can't find people of color. And one, Rana, our work is the fact that the pipeline is not broken, right? It exists. I think the hands down, we work with a lot of recruiters as well. I think the bottom line is people are looking in the same places for talent. And if you look in the same places, you're going to get the same results. If you tend to have the same people hiring, you end up with people who look like them. And it's not sometimes it's an unconscious bias. Sometimes it's not even understood. Like, you just tend to be comfortable with people who have shared experiences to yourself, or shared histories, or, doesn't even have to be race or ethnicity. It could just be where you grew up or how you grew up. And so I think that's the second part, is that we need to break out of actually where you recruit, how you recruit, the questions that you ask. And then the third part of that, I think the thing that's come up for Rana quite a bit is lived experience. I think we don't give enough credit to lived experience, whether that is women of color, people of color, mothers, immigrants, like the fact that they take risks to come here and have given up everything in another country. Like, there are other aspects and qualities to leadership that fall outside the traditional recruiting process, the traditional interviewing process. And as a result of that, you don't always get the best, the most creative, the most innovative people in the seat. Because what we have found, and again, we've now worked with a lot of, well-known recruiters, the names, the creme de la creme, they say the same thing. Companies tend to want to look at a slate of criteria. Here are the 10 things I'm looking for. I'm looking for P&L experience. I'm looking for global experience. I'm looking for almost what we call been there, done that experience, right? Like, I've been in the seat before, so I just want the same person. Well, then you're going to get the same people, right? Which, unfortunately, right now, for a lot of us, it is going to be the white male executive, just because they've been in the seat before. And so you don't get the variety of people who are even, traditionally ready for the role if you just look at those same criteria. So I think one is, looking in new places and doing the actual recruiting and the pool differently. More people actually sitting in the seat recruiting, so then you get different, people looking. And then thirdly, we really have to redo the criteria of what matters and what we're looking for, and find ways to really widen the definition of leadership, and looked at lived experience in a very different way. And there's many more. I think Ron, I actually wrote an article at one point that we haven't posted yet, but I think it had 12 points. So there's many more than those three, but I think those are the top three that come up for me.
I'm just going to partner it on the other side, right? Which is, are you as an organization asking yourself important questions that are relevant to whether or not you can keep whoever you're bringing in? So there has to be a question within the organization about what kind of capacity do we have to even not just bring people in the door, but to really create an experience that enables them to succeed. What is it about our culture? Is our culture people of color friendly? Is our culture women friendly? Right? Is our culture marketing friendly? Because some cultures may be more engineer friendly, So I think we have to be asking ourselves the questions about culture. I think we have to be discerning about whether or not there is real room and space to invest in the people that we're bringing in to ensure that they succeed. There also needs to be room and space to have those honest conversations in the interview process where you're telling the truth about where you are. A lot of the things that we heard was where HR in interviews, people of color were sold diversity. They were sold the fact that the company was going to be making strong headway in that work, and this was a part of that initiative. They were sold on the fact that they were going to be able to be strong partners and helping to diversify the company. And then 5 minutes after they got hired, all of that got deprioritized. And so we have to be really careful about that and be willing to have more honest conversations about where the company is, more honest conversations about what the company's vision is. And what we want to notice is, if we're talking to our HR beloveds, right, who may be in the circle, is if you don't have the answers to those questions, those are important questions to be asking before we start a recruitment process, right? Because those are going to be some of the kinds of questions that people of color are going to be asking you when they come in. Do you know how many people of color are in your leadership? Do you know what the goals are, what the aim is, what the vision is for what you want to be able to achieve in the context of diversifying your organization? What does it mean about the culture of inclusion? So, we're in a market now, and you all know this, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, where now it's an interviewer's market on some levels. And you have to be able to answer those more challenging questions as an organization, as a company, to be able to really create a context where this person really feels like there's a level of honesty and authenticity about where you are as an organization, and that there's real room to contribute. One of the things that people of color are very sensitive and aware of is tokenism. Are you just after me to check the box? Or do you really want who I am? And are you really interested in what I have to bring that can benefit the mission and the vision and the bottom line of your organization? And we got to start to have really honest conversations about that, no matter where we are. People of color appreciate the honesty even more necessarily than whether or not you have a bunch to say that you've accomplished. The honesty and the integrity in that process can take you a very, very long way.
Yes, you've got emojis popping off in the chat box, claps saying also tired of being a placeholder. These are incredible answers, actionable, inspirational, and so honest. Yes. Would love to know your perspective on, how in that interview process, how can one courageously ask how to help the company be or practice accountability? Let's say, like, they can throw out all the fluff, like, we want to do all these things, but once I get here, what can I do to make sure that that this isn't just lip service? Because I find that a lot of people get in, like you said, Rob, people get in, and then this is like, these were all stock photos, and this is like, I'm the only person, you're checking the box. So okay, it's all good. How can I help you, really get to the goals that you want to achieve, so that, people aren't bamboozled, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is, is really being willing to honestly ask the company, are we serious? I think to Deepa's point, when you have one person in a role, I'm gonna add it on, right, with this much budget, right, in very few years. Not only is it not a pipeline challenge, it's a leadership challenge. Leadership has got to be on board, and we've seen the data, right? No matter what, whether we're talking about Harvard or McKinsey or Deloitte, like, we've seen the data, and we know that when CEOs buy in, beyond lip service, it moves, and it moves quickly. And so part of what's going to be really important, if you're in a DEI role, if you're in an HR role with a DEI mandate, is that you're having very forthright conversations with leadership about where they stand and what they're willing to do and what the organization has capacity for and how much of a priority is this really, because those buy-ins are going to be crucial to being able to actually move the needle on the ultimate game.
And I might add on slightly differently. I think part of what we wanted to do with NFormation is to give women networks. So what's exciting about NFormation, it is across industry, it's across the country, and we've had global interest, but we paused on that. Part of what we wanted to be able to do is, if I didn't know Ra, but I saw she was somehow through LinkedIn, at a company B that I was looking at, I wanted to be able to ping her or call her and say, listen, I'm a woman of color. Like, is this a good place to go? Like, we need to find, I think I'm kind of outside of the interview. I think there's things that we can do in between social media, between, being able to search on companies like Fairy Godboss and get reviews that, are anonymous, and now also being able to reach out to people. There's different ways to get that information. So yes, I think it's important to ask those questions in an interview, but I also encourage the women that we work with to find other ways and to really kick the tires and to really make sure and to reach out to extended networks or ask friends of friends to really see if that's true, because there's a lot of things being said. And unfortunately, we're getting a lot of calls after women have been placed within a year where it's not matching what they're hearing. And so that is absolutely part of what we have to change. And some of that falls on being creative about how you find that information as well.
I want to just also underscore that network piece. That there is, there is a strong network effect, particularly around the innovation of DEI in NFormation. And there's a way that these women are finding one another and actually putting their collective brain trust together to think outside of the box about how to move the needle in their respective organizations and corporations. So I do just want to underscore that networks outside of your typical normal practices are crucial for you if this is part of your mandate.
And I was just going to add one of the things, and I'll say this, and then if we get 10 requests afterwards, Raul will tell me I shouldn't have shared this because it's so early. One of the things we're piloting this fall is because a lot of companies, you can imagine, we announced Untitled, all these companies showed up and said, well, if you have access to all these senior women of color, we want to put them on our boards or on our C-suite. Like that was the immediate request. So we went deep into thinking if we were going to help with placement, which we are, and we're starting this fall, we want to do it differently. And so part of what we are doing is we don't want to just place women or again, we're not a placement agency. That's not our core competency. But as we work with people to do that work, we are saying you also need to get support for the woman. So once she is placed, maybe it's a coach or some sort of wrapper service, and also for the team that she's working with. So I know that's not practical for every single hire, because that is what we're asking for is a significant investment. But if you want to keep a woman of color that you've invested in hiring and really think is going to make a difference, there are activities and actions you can put around the woman of color to also help her and help the culture make space for her to be in all her glory. And that's part of what the work is as well. It's not, I think part of what we need to do is realize it's not just placing people or hiring people and then they'll be successful, as Ross was talking about, it is everything else that goes into the recipe. And it's a 2 to 3 year journey, and we all need to be invested in all sides of doing that.
The benefit for an organization that says yes to a model like this is that it doesn't only support you in being able to recruit and retain one. You're actually building a model now for success that enables you to recruit and retain many.
So exciting and so necessary. This is a part of like, okay, we're at the crossroads. Do we still do things the way we've been doing it historically speaking, which clearly is not working, or do we try to change it up? And I love, Deepa, that you said that we have to be creative with the way that we approach this, because that also adds a lightness to it and joy to it, because it is a very heavy conversation to have, and especially people are career pivoting, or if they, feel like, with all of the things going on in the world, lost, this isolation piece that you all mentioned before, it's real. So I really appreciate the fact that you all are proposing creative ways to just change the game. Thank you so much. We've got about 7 minutes left, so I'm just going to hold for a light pause to see if someone wants to hop off mute to voice a question or a reflection. Now is your time to shine.
This is Amy. I just wanted to hop off mute really quickly. Full disclosure, I was the one who asked about talent acquisition, and I am the one who is the national manager for a major corporation that also just went public. So I do want to point out, the very first thing I said in my interview was, I am only going to do this job if after 1 year I am guaranteed an additional headcount. Because I like, this is not a one-man job. I was doing it also as an assistant principal prior to coming into this private realm. So I just wanted to say, I agree. I 100% will not continue to be the only one doing the work. But I also hold the executive committee accountable, which is something that I've started to do monthly on LinkedIn, which, they only want positive shouts on LinkedIn. So that's a very easy way to make sure and hold them accountable for them to do the learning and the work as well. But the talent acquisition piece, because I'm coming out of the public sector, I was not in the private sector. So that was one of the reasons I wanted to hear whether or not what I was thinking in terms of where it needed to go was in alignment with what your thoughts were. And gratefully, we're there. So hopefully we'll be moving in the right direction. Thank you for your answer and your honesty.
Good luck. It's an exciting role. I mean, that's the other thing. Like, I also don't think we're saying, women of color don't take any roles or people of color don't take any roles. I think we're just saying we want you to go in eyes wide open so you can ask all the questions, so you know what you're facing and you can get help when you need it, right? Because you're not alone. There's many people who are the sole person in those roles. And by the way, what's another surprising thing to me about NFormation is we've ended up with a lot of chief inclusion officers, like senior women who are coming to us or coming to the group because they want to talk amongst themselves because it's the first time in their roles or they're being pushed to do more and they want to hear from other women of color who are in similar spaces. So it happens more often than not. And I think we all need to support each other in figuring it out because it's all new terrain, to be honest with you.
The thing that I also want to just underscore, and Amy, thank you for being willing to, to give voice to your question and who was behind the question, is keep your list of criteria close and keep updating and refining it. because I do want to say to you that one of the things that we also consistently see often is people take those roles and they don't necessarily have that accountability piece, or they don't necessarily have that criteria, right? So being clear about what your criteria for success is, and being clear that you're in communication about what your criteria for success is, and that you're unapologetically asking for the things that you need in order to succeed.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Amy. Good luck. Thank you for hopping off mute. I know that you are not alone, as Deepa and Ra mentioned in the beginning. Sometimes it seems like we're alone, but I think that, the fact that you were able to hop off mute, I hope that that was able to give encouragement to other folks who might be in the same situation. So I appreciate you. We've got about 4 minutes left. I would love for Ra and Deepa to just share more knowledge about information, anything that you all are excited about. I know you were alluding to a book coming out and maybe a new way that you are, implementing folks being placed into different workplaces. Anything else that you all want to share? I want to give the last 4 minutes to you two for information.
Yeah, I'll go first, and then Rob, please add on. We have our combined work together, and then we have work we're both doing in the world that is kindred but separate. So one is, the book that is coming out for me in March 1st, is 500 Stories of Women of Color, right? And I was focused more on corporate because that was my own experience and where I saw real challenges. And so if that is of interest, that comes out, and I'm deep in, the process of all of that goes on when you launch a book, as Ra has done before me. And so we smile and laugh all the time because that's a whole job in itself. So if that's of interest. But I think with NFormation, for our joint work together, we are starting to work with companies, and we're having conversations with companies who are asking, can we send maybe 10 of our senior women of color, or, and I'm using senior loosely, I mean, at least, 7 to 10 years of experience, not necessarily women of color who are just beginning, because there's a different set of issues for that group. But for our women of color, is that something NFormation could do? Because we don't necessarily have the best thoughts around advancement, or we want to provide community, and if there's something you can provide. So that's one. I think secondly, if there are women of color, even one-off in your organization that you want to send our way, we do programming weekly, very much around advancement and voice. So that's second. I think there's also, we're doing a public speaker series and other ways to get involved with companies. And we also have research coming out this fall, early January, still tweaking on the date, with the Billie Jean King Leadership Initiative that is focused on how workplaces and how white women, how women of color, how allies can also support women of color in thriving. And so that is going to be exciting research that's also based on interviewing and surveying over 1,500 women in the workplace. So I think there's a lot that if, as an individual, if you're interested, if you're an ally and you're interested, or if you're a company and you're interested, we'd love you to come reach out to us. So either maybe just I'll put the email address, and Marielle will type it into the chat, but hello@n2formation.com if you're interested, and we will definitely follow up. But Rod, did I get that right? Anything else? There's so many things going on.
There's so many things going on, but I think those are the big things. Absolutely. For now, the other piece that I will add to that is for us, so my book is called The Calling, and it is also a guide for corporate change agents, for people who are really wanting to move greater purpose and meaning through their organizations. And our companion work with allies is deepening through the collaboration with my company and NFormation. We're doing more work specifically with how do you create more inclusive spaces? How do you create more inclusive environments? And how do you do it in a way that isn't about shaming and punishing, but that is actually about people, every single one of us, having an empowered role to play in contributing to the kind of environments that we want to create and contributing to the kind of leaders that we want to be. And so this work will be moving through the success wrapper with information, but it's also, we recognize that for people who have people now and are trying to figure out how to make it work, that there's also this opportunity to be able to support more inclusive work. And so we are doing more inclusive oriented coaching and mentoring to support that work.
So beautiful. I mean, time has flown by. You all have dropped so much knowledge. I see that Deepa is writing there. I'm just, for folks who are not joining live, the email is hello@n2formation.com. And then just let us know how we can connect with you all on LinkedIn or on, wherever you prefer folks to reach out to you all. I know you put the email there, but I just want to make sure that we drive people directly to, connect with the both of you, because this is just the tip of the iceberg, you all. Like I mentioned in the beginning, I've had the honor of interviewing these two women before, and I hope that we can continue to, have this flow together. Where should people find you two? Please say it out loud.
Yes, so Deepa has put it in the chat. It's hello@n2formation.com. It's also n2formation.com is our website if you want to learn more. I also want to say, if you feel called to nominate yourself for the community, please do not be shy. I know we think about other people all the time because that's who we are. We're always wanting to help and serve. But I also want to say, if this spoke to you and you want to know more, please don't hesitate to be in communication with us.
Beautiful. All right. So thank you everyone for joining. I hope to see some of you on the next NFormation meeting. Thank you so much, Raw Goddess. Thank you, Deepa. Thank you everyone who hopped off mute and wrote in the chat box. And good luck, everyone. Be your best selves, unapologetically true. And let's stay connected, everyone. Have a good day.